In this lecture segment, we are talking about Ottonian art and its continuation of the themes of Carolingian art. We will focus on works of art commissioned by Bishop Bernward, including a set of doors and a column. After Charlemagne's death, the empire passes to his son Louis, and then at his death in 843, it split up between Charlemagne's three grandsons and turned into three different territories. So again, we enter a period of destabilization when we do not have a strong centralized administrative authority. And one of the results of this is feudalism, when we have knights, military leaders, who hold land that is farmed by serfs, by peasants. And in return for the lands they control, the knights agree to provide military aid to the nobles and the king. We end up with a tripartite social system: those who fight, the knights who hold land, the nobles, and the king; those who pray, the clergy, many of whom live at monasteries; and those who work, the peasants who farm the land. This was not an entirely new system. Feudalism had been around already, but it becomes more entrenched during this era. We go through periods when there is more centralized authority, and one of these is the Ottonian period, when a king, Otto I, tried to revive the Carolingian Empire, has himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, and uses art and architecture to signal the renewal of the Christian Roman Empire. At this point, the Holy Roman Empire takes foot in Germany and will last until the age of Napoleon, officially ending in 1806. Ottonian art, dating from about 930 to 1000, then continued the Carolingian emphasis on revival and renewal of the Roman Empire. And our key figure in understanding how Ottonian art expressed imperial ambitions is Bishop Bernward, who was the Bishop of Hildesheim in present-day Germany. He was in charge of the construction of this church, the Abbey Church of St. Michael, which you could think of as being a built version of the church we saw in the plan of St. Gall. It has two choir spaces where the monks would be when singing the Mass, a long nave, and a westwork, giving the church that vertical element. As you can see in the diagram of the surviving structure, it's a very chunky church, with clear geometric forms making up each of the parts. It has an elevated ambulatory going around the apse end of the church that is raised to accommodate a crypt underneath where the relics of St. Michael were kept. Bishop Bernward travels from this church to Rome on pilgrimage, and while there he soaks it all up and comes home with plans to build monumental works of art that express the link of the Holy Roman Empire of the Ottonians to the Christian Roman Empire of the past. Keep in mind that Bishop Bernward was a product of and a contributor to the network of learning that Charlemagne established in his monasteries. He was a scholar, a statesman, and had been a tutor to Otto III, the current emperor, but he was also an artist of sorts, a goldsmith most likely. And we see all of these interests come together in two projects he commissioned, planned, and may even have helped make. The first is a 12-foot bronze column, about 2 feet in diameter, made in the year 1000. You can get a feel for its size in this image of it being crated before being reinstalled. It was clearly inspired by the column of Trajan that Bishop Bernward saw in Rome, which is an honorific or triumphal column intended to honor the accomplishments of the Roman Emperor Trajan. In the Bernward column, he adapted the basic format of a spiraling narrative circling up a column to tell the story of Christ instead of a narrative about an emperor's military feats. It's also made of bronze and cast using a technique that had not been used for hundreds of years, the same technique used to make the equestrian portrait of Marcus Aurelius. In this detail, we see Christ in a New Testament scene performing his first miracle, turning water into wine at a wedding. We think it was originally placed at the altar of St. Michael's, and it was originally topped with a bronze crucifixion scene. The column of Trajan was topped with a bronze statue of the emperor. An equestrian portrait of Justinian graced the top of a triumphal column in Constantinople, but for his column, Bishop Bernward topped it with a now-lost bronze crucifixion scene, referring to the triumph of Christ. In its material, format, and topper, the Bernward column continues the same threads of association between the current empire and the old Roman Empire. Our second Bishop Bernward commission is a set of bronze doors made for the same church. They are made for the west entrance of the church, so the main doors in the westwork. You see the exterior, the aerial view, as well as the plan, and here is the facade, right over here. They are massive doors, about 16 feet tall, and cast in bronze using the lost wax casting technique that we talked about with Greek sculpture, in which the Romans also used. Each panel of the doors was cast in one huge piece. So one piece here and one piece here. A very difficult, dangerous, and technical process, something Bernward may have learned about on his travels. While in Rome, he most certainly saw the large wooden doors for the Church of Santa Sabina that date from the early 5th century, as well as surviving bronze doors from the Roman period. In this image of the doors installed at St. Mary's Cathedral near St. Michael's today, you can get an idea of the depth of the doors and how much the figures project off the doors into the viewer's space. The lions' heads are about 4 feet off the ground, so chest high for the average human. The doors have an intricate iconographic program that has scenes from the Old Testament beginning with the creation of Eve in the Garden of Eden to the murder of Abel by Cain on the left, and then on the right are scenes of the New Testament moving from the bottom up chronologically, from the Annunciation when Mary was informed that she would be the mother of Christ, to the crucifixion of Christ, and a scene from the resurrection of Christ. Each scene from the Old Testament is paired with a scene from the New Testament, as the Old Testament events or prophecies have counterparts in the New Testament. A problem in the Old Testament story is resolved in the New Testament, or a story in the Old Testament, like the story of Jonah that we talked about in the early Christian period, sets up a type or pattern. As Jonah spends 3 days in the belly of the whale, so does Christ's body spend 3 days in the tomb before his resurrection. This is a theological concept called typology, and each of the Old Testament scenes on the left prefigures the New Testament scenes on the right. Let's look at an example of prefiguration in this typological iconographic program. In this scene, Adam and Eve have both eaten the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden and have been discovered by a deity. Notice how we can tell what is happening based on the gestures. God points his finger accusingly at Adam. Adam gestures towards Eve, and Eve gestures towards the serpent, the representation of the devil. These are highly stylized figures that serve a didactic mission. They are teaching. They do not need to look like the natural world to fulfill their purpose. The story needs to be readable to an almost entirely illiterate audience, so the artist stresses gesture, simple vegetation that evokes but does not literally depict a garden, and uses body types that signal gender but are not naturalistic. Again, we have the sausage arms and legs of the tetrarchs, as meaning and message are more important here than looking like the world we see with our eyes. This scene from the Old Testament of passing the blame is a prefiguration of the New Testament scene on the right that relates to passing the blame in the story of Christ. In this New Testament scene, Pilate, the Roman governor, could overrule the death sentence imposed by the Jewish king Herod, who was willing to follow the will of the Jewish Pharisees who were calling for Jesus' death. But he lets the decision be up to the crowd of gathered Jews and passes the blame to them, washing his hands of it. 2 scenes, one from the Old Testament and one from the New Testament, in which what happened in the Old mirrors what happens in the New. Another example is on the left. Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is the fall of man, when man could no longer be in the presence of deity and needed a savior to atone for man's sins. On the right, we see the crucifixion of Christ, the sacrifice that according to this theology could save mankind. So the actions on the left necessitated the sacrifice shown on the right. And according to legend, wood from the tree on the left was used to construct the cross in the scene from the right, in this typological narrative of paired scenes in which the Old Testament scene prefigures the New Testament scene. In this view, you can see how much attention was given to making these doors readable to an audience. Even though the crucifixion scene is so high up on the doors, it comes over the viewer who sees the death of Christ. Bishop Bernward continued the efforts of the Carolingians to commission works that make connections between the Christian Roman Empire and the new Holy Roman Empire, but doing so in such a way that these works of art also serve to educate people, and especially pilgrims.